Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello and welcome to Podcasting Smarter. This is Norma Belenky, Podbean's head of events. And in today's episode, we're having a conversation with Podbean's Senior Vice President of Advertising, Kerry Tracy, on how businesses can maximize their podcast advertising impact. Stay tuned, and here we go. Hi, Kerry. How's it going?
Hi, Norma Jean. It's going well. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so excited to talk about podcast advertising today and really how businesses can make the most of this incredible advertising medium. Podcast advertising we're living in an incredible time for podcast advertising. It's incredible. So first off, can you tell us how can businesses maximize the impact of their podcast advertising campaigns?
There are a couple things. Number one is that they need to use repetition. Repetition is really important. And what makes a brand memorable is really making sure you have a significant amount of time for the campaign to repeat the messaging. We typically recommend 3 to 4 weeks at a minimum. So it's long enough to test. And you've got to make sure that you've got enough frequency in there. And frequency, what we mean by frequency is the amount of times that person's actually heard the ad.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, you mentioned repetition. Repetition is where an ad plays, obviously, more than once, over and over again. And it can enhance ad recall and make ads more memorable for listeners. Can you explain a little bit first about how that works?
Yeah, the likelihood of someone remembering an ad on the first time is not very likely. Second time, it may trigger something, but back in the day, they would say people watch TV, they would see the ad, and they'd reach for a pen or pencil to get the 800 number, and they wouldn't find it. Second time, they'd be ready with the pen or pencil. And the third time, they'd actually order or call the 800 number. It's not that dissimilar with podcasting, but the difference with podcasting is, people are usually out and about, and it may not be as easy for them to, click to call or click to order. So it's really important to make sure that you have a long enough campaign and enough frequency to help them order that or remember that product.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you share some best practices for utilizing repetition in podcast advertising campaigns, especially for businesses out there who are looking to advertise maybe on endless budgets, because we deal with like large corporate advertisers, but also businesses that maybe have limited budgets or want to test budgets as well. On the advertising marketplace, we have over 35,000 shows. So it's something where there is a show for every advertiser.
Yes, definitely. And that's the beauty of Podbean is with the incredible varied selection of genres that we have and the amount of shows that we have, you can really touch upon every audience out there. My recommendation would be for whether it's a smaller advertiser or a bigger advertiser is to look at three things. You should look at what your goal is. Are you driving people to a website or to a store? Is it pure brand awareness? And so number one is the goal. Number two is the audience, who you're going after or targeting. And number three would be the budget. And the recommendation would be that if you're with a limited budget, it's going to dictate what you can or what you can't do. And so our recommendation with a smaller budget would to be focused on niche podcasts where it will allow you to get more frequency, more repetition during that campaign, as opposed to spreading yourself thin across multiple podcasts. I think you're going to get a bigger bang for the buck if you just focus on that one particular, say, podcast and that audience and really bring that messaging home.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of how advertisers can have success within that limited budget, it sounds like you're starting maybe not with less campaigns, but with less podcasts to advertise on.
Yes, exactly. And,
Okay.
and again, it's more to drive that messaging home as opposed to spreading yourself thin across multiple podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if somebody's a fan of a show, they're going to listen to multiple episodes. Right?
Exactly.
And so then your ad will play for them through multiple episodes of that podcast. So I think that's a really important aspect as well. And I want to ask next, how does Podbean's weekly frequency cap feature in the podcast ads marketplace? Because it's a really incredible feature that's built into the marketplace. How does it help maximize return and revenue, return on investment, and improve the listener experience?
Yeah, overall, people in advertising understand that podcasting is incredibly effective, and that's why it has really taken off the way it has. But if there is one negative, a lot of people bring up the fact that they hear the same ad over and over again. And you may see that in other forms of media as well. But the beauty of our frequency capping is that because we can track it by IP, we will only deliver that ad, say for that one particular listen, we may cap it at 3 times or 5 times per week. So it's a controlled frequency and it allows you with your pacing for the campaign. So it's evenly distributed as opposed to if you don't have frequency capping. And I think there are a number of podcast publishers out there that don't have that function. That's why people complain. They get too many of the same ads over and over again because they don't have that function. And I think that's one advantage that we have, not only for our advertisers, but for our listeners. For the advertisers, we're not getting the listeners upset. And for the listeners, they're not like turning off after the fourth time that they've heard it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're all a bit put off if you hear the same ad a bunch of times in a row and it's okay. Like it does the opposite. It's the inverse of what you really want an ad to do, right? It's something where
Exactly.
it instead of getting people excited, it really turns people off from your product. So it's definitely something to consider. And it's great that we have that feature built in. The software that Podbean has built and the platform itself is incredible. Like you can just literally create an account, log in, create a campaign. You can upload your ad, or you can even have a host read ad made for you with a minimum campaign. But it's something where it's literally like click, click, and go.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really incredible. So that frequency cap really is also an incredible feature, I think, that makes the difference in the listener experience, like you said, but also for the podcaster, because if listeners are going to hear the same ad over and over again, they might even turn off that episode. They might switch to a different episode or turn off their podcast app for a minute and do something else. So you definitely
Exactly.
want to keep people engaged. And in addition to repetition, what other strategies or tools really can businesses leverage to enhance the impact of their podcast advertising campaigns?
One of the things to keep in mind is in addition to making sure that you get a bigger bang for the buck where you limit your amount of podcasts that you advertise are on, we can provide that function, but we can also provide geofencing, which allows you to target you can target by country, you can target by city, or you can target by state. And again, with that type of function, it allows you to eliminate waste where you may only have stores in a certain amount of states. And therefore, you're not wasting your ad dollars in states that you don't have either physical stores or you can't deliver to those stores for e-commerce companies. And then we also have the ability or as an advertiser, you have the ability to choose by genre or individual shows. So you can go in there and say, I want to target sports shows or podcasts, or I want to target just this podcast. So you have all those three features in our self-serve ads marketplace.
Yeah, it is really incredibly nuanced. Honestly, if it's something where, specifically for geofencing, we talk about this all the time. Ronnie from our team, our podcast specialist, uses a great example of a cookbook, right? So if you have a cookbook that you want to sell, maybe across the United States, you can select all of America, but maybe you are opening a restaurant in a specific area. And so it doesn't make sense to advertise that restaurant nationwide. It makes sense to advertise that restaurant in the state that you are opening the restaurant. So it's definitely incredible. And it's something where I think it feels like you can customize things just to the nth, right? It's something where, you can really find your audience as a business. You can find the people that are the right fit. And that's important.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's important to have your campaign as efficient as possible. And when I say efficient, that again, you get a big bang for the buck and that you maximize those dollars, whether it be limited or whether it be larger budgets, whether you're a local pizza shop or your P&G, you want to make sure that your advertising is going to come back as a good investment.
Yeah, absolutely. This conversation is also inspired by our blog. So you can read more about how businesses can maximize their podcast advertising impact on our blog. The link is here in the show notes, and you can read a lot more about podcast advertising overall on our blog at blog.podbean.com. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Kerry, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Smarter. If you have any podcasting questions or want to get in touch, send us an email at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thanks so much and happy podcasting.